We've all heard the name Tiananmen, but whenever it's mentioned, it almost always comes with two chilling words: massacre. So what exactly was the Tiananmen incident? Did a massacre really happen in that square? And why, after all these years, has the world still not reached a unified answer? The beginning, a dream for freedom. Autumn 1986. China was slowly emerging from decades of isolation. The first signs of economic reform had begun to spark hope. But invisible walls still divided the people from their most basic rights: freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press. And amidst that silence, one man appeared. Professor Fang Lizhi, a renowned astrophysicist, had just completed a research tenure at Princeton University, one of the top institutions in the United States. He returned to China not only with academic knowledge, but also with a new wave of ideas: democracy, liberty, and a deep desire for change. During a lecture tour at Chinese universities, he made no attempt to hide his views. He criticized the slow pace of reform and condemned the monopoly of power that had suppressed the country's potential. He declared, "A nation cannot progress without academic freedom, freedom of thought, and the voice of its people." His words were like sparks in dry grass, quietly seeping into the hearts of thousands of students. His speeches were recorded and spread like wildfire. Cassette tapes were passed from dorm to dorm, played in secret at night as young hearts began to beat in unison. And then it began. By the end of 1986, students in major cities began to take to the streets. They were no longer afraid. They called for political reform, freedom of the press, and democratization. Their chants echoed through the cold nights, carrying both hope and uncertainty. The government acted quickly. Professor Fang was arrested and interrogated. Not long after, attention shifted to the man believed to have ideologically nurtured this wave of unrest: General Secretary Hu Yaobang. Hu did not directly lead or incite the protests, but he was well known for his openness, his support of reform, and his previous defense of student movements. To the conservatives within the party, it was his softness that had allowed disorder to take root. And so, in January 1987, Hu Yaobang was forced to resign. But the story didn't end there. 2 years later, on April 15, 1989, Hu Yaobang died of a heart attack. But to thousands of students, that death was not merely physical, it was symbolic. It was the death of a dream, and they decided to do something about it. Within days, Tiananmen Square became the center of the nation's attention. Students gathered to mourn, to honor, but also to carry forward a dream left unfinished. The shouts in the heart of Beijing. On April 17, 1989, the first groups of students arrived at Tiananmen Square. They carried white wreaths, black banners, and handwritten signs. Silently, they climbed the stone steps of the square and sat in mourning beneath a portrait of Hu Yaobang, the man they believed to be the last symbol of justice and reform in a decaying system. There were no shouts, no weapons, no destruction, only bowed heads and quiet prayers. But within days, the crowd grew exponentially. Not just students, but also teachers, intellectuals, workers, and ordinary citizens joined them. From rural provinces and city suburbs, they poured into the heart of the capital like a rising tide. The long-suppressed dream in their hearts had finally found a place to rise. They set up tents, tarps, and makeshift forums. By day, they debated and drafted petitions. By night, they sang the national anthem, lit candles, and read aloud their calls for reform. Their list of demands grew longer. Recognize Hu Yaobang's reformist ideals as correct, end the campaign against bourgeois liberalism, publicly disclose the personal wealth and incomes of senior officials, allow independent media and end press censorship, raise salaries for educators and increase investment in education. Restore the people's right to freely express their thoughts. But above all, they cried for democracy, real, transparent, and with a voice for the people. Within the Chinese leadership, a silent storm was brewing. General Secretary Zhao Ziang, Hu's successor, took the side of dialogue. He believed the students were not rebels, but patriots. He walked into the square without military guards or protective gear, only the worried heart of a father among his restless children. "I didn't come to scold you," he told them, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I came to beg you to go home, continue your studies, and help build our country through knowledge." Many cried, and thousands of students agreed to withdraw. But not all were convinced. A smaller group chose to stay. To them, those were merely comforting words, a lullaby for disobedience. They didn't want compromise. They wanted change, now. And so, the protests continued, this time with a harder edge. They began a hunger strike. They declared they would not leave the square unless the government made a formal commitment. In the days that followed, the world turned its eyes to Beijing, and under the glare of international cameras, a quiet but escalating political showdown had officially begun. The night of June 3rd, the morning of June 4th. By day, Tiananmen Square was filled with songs, banners, and a dream for freedom. But when night fell, everything changed. In late May 1989, after weeks of rising tension, the Chinese government officially declared martial law. Thousands of troops were mobilized. Military vehicles and armored personnel carriers rumbled toward Beijing from all directions. But they didn't expect what came next. Tens of thousands of citizens flooded into the streets, not to fight, but to block the army. They stood in front of trucks, they laid down on the roads, they brought food and water to soldiers, pleading with them to stand with the people. And unexpectedly, the military pulled back. For a moment, peace seemed possible. But that calm was only the silence before the storm. On the evening of June 3rd, columns of troops once again rolled into Beijing. This time, there was no hesitation, no intention to retreat. They had orders, and they were going to carry them out. As soldiers approached, crowds of citizens, angry and desperate, clashed with them. Some threw bricks, bottles, and Molotov cocktails. Barricades were set ablaze. Military trucks were torched. Gunfire erupted. Screams filled the air. Chaos spread through the streets. In the square, students scrambled to reinforce makeshift barriers with wooden carts and debris. They were unarmed. They had no plan for war. Just willpower, loudspeakers, and handwritten slogans. Around 2 a.m., the military had completely surrounded Tiananmen Square. Flares lit up the sky. Armored vehicles encircled the square. Soldiers lined up. A commanding officer raised a megaphone. "Leave the square. If you don't, there will be serious consequences." Students hesitated. Some wept. They shouted into their loudspeakers, "We are not traitors. We only want to be heard. Please don't shoot the youth of China." Eventually, after hours of negotiation, a deal was reached. By 4:30 a.m. on June 4th, the last group of students peacefully left Tiananmen Square. And by sunrise, the square, once filled with chants and candles, was silent. The tents were gone, the banners torn down. Only tanks and soldiers remained. Was there really a massacre in Tiananmen Square? When the sun rose on June 4th, 1989, Tiananmen Square was once again under the full control of the Chinese military, but the silence that followed didn't bring peace. Instead, it brought questions, and the world was asking just one: was there a massacre? Within hours, reports began to surface. Grainy photos, shaky footage, eyewitness testimonies. International media ran headlines with chilling words: the Tiananmen Massacre. And from that moment, the world divided. On one side, protest leaders, student activists, and some Western journalists claimed that a mass killing took place right in the square. They spoke of soldiers using machine guns to fire into unarmed crowds, tanks running over fleeing protesters, explosive bullets being used, types outlawed by international warfare conventions. They said the army came not just to control, but to eradicate. Some claimed the number of deaths reached into the hundreds, maybe even the thousands. Not just students, but ordinary citizens, journalists, medical workers. No official list of names was ever released. No full death toll has ever been confirmed. Just candles, stories, and silence. On the other side, a different narrative emerged, supported by some foreign diplomats, journalists present on the ground, and later even leaked intelligence documents. According to them, no massacre occurred inside the square itself. The students were allowed to leave peacefully after negotiations. The majority of the violence happened outside the square, in the surrounding streets, where crowds had turned violent and clashed with troops. One cable from the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, later published by WikiLeaks, stated that the military did not fire into the students inside Tiananmen Square, but did encounter violent resistance in other parts of the city. Soldiers were attacked with firebombs. Some were burned alive in their vehicles. Even some journalists later admitted that early coverage may have exaggerated or misinterpreted what really happened. So the question remains, was there a massacre? The answer depends on where you were standing that night. It may be true that no one was gunned down inside the square itself, but it is also true that many people died on the streets, in alleys, and in the chaos of that night. There was blood, there was death, there was silence. Even today, the Chinese government has never released an official death toll. Estimates vary wildly, from a few hundred to over 2,000. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Not a single, well-defined massacre, but a sweeping crackdown, a moment when hope collided with power, and the dream of a generation was extinguished. Operation Yellowbird, shadows behind the spotlight. When the barricades were cleared and the crowds dispersed, Beijing returned to a tense, unnatural calm. The tents were gone, the chants silenced, the banners removed. But the story didn't end there. It had only gone underground. In the shadows of post-Tiananmen China, a new chapter began, one that didn't unfold in front of cameras, but behind closed doors, on back alleys, and across dark waters. A secret rescue mission was set into motion. Its code name, Operation Yellowbird. After the crackdown, the Chinese government released a list of the most wanted protest leaders. Many had already gone into hiding, some wounded, some afraid, all hunted. And then, from across the sea, a network answered their silent calls for help. Western intelligence agencies, including the CIA, MI6, and French intelligence, along with Hong Kong businessmen, activists, and even members of the triads, joined forces to create one of the most extraordinary escape operations of the late 20th century. Their mission, smuggled dissidents out of China through the dense urban jungle of Guangdong, across the southern border into British-controlled Hong Kong, and eventually to the west. From late June 1989 until 1997, over 400 individuals were rescued. Some were spirited away in shipping containers, others disguised as tourists or factory workers. Some escaped under the cover of night on fishing boats. The logistics were risky and expensive. The average extraction cost about $5,000 per person, but high-profile escapes could reach up to $70,000. The total cost of the operation was at least $2 million, funded through private donors, political alliances, and discreet government channels. Among those who escaped were prominent movement leaders, such as Wu Kaixi, Chai Ling, Feng Congde, and many others who continued the democratic cause from abroad. But as heroic as it sounds, Operation Yellowbird also raised uncomfortable questions. Why were Western intelligence agencies so deeply involved in a domestic Chinese movement? Was this purely humanitarian or part of a broader geopolitical strategy? Could Tiananmen have been not just a spontaneous uprising, but the spark of a larger color revolution that never came to pass? At the time, revolutions were sweeping across Eastern Europe. Regimes in Poland, Hungary, Romania were falling like dominoes. The Cold War was ending, but the games of influence were not. And for China, Tiananmen was the moment where it decided, not here, not now. Operation Yellowbird continued quietly until 1997, when Hong Kong was handed over to China. After that, the operation ceased. Its window of escape finally shut. What Tiananmen showed the world was not just a clash between government and people, but a glimpse of the high-stakes power play happening beneath the surface. Because sometimes revolutions don't just happen, they're watched, supported, funded, and sometimes abandoned. Final reflection, a dream unfinished. When the tanks rolled out and the banners were gone, Beijing returned to normal on the surface. But beneath the pavement, in the hearts of a generation, something remained shattered. Tiananmen did not end with an explosion. It ended with silence. The kind of silence that lingers, the kind that fills history books with blank pages, the kind that leaves more questions than answers. For some, Tiananmen is a symbol of courage. For others, it's a lesson in control. And for many, it's a mirror, reflecting back a time when young people believed they could change everything by simply standing together. So, was there a massacre? Was it a democratic movement? Was it a failed revolution or something more? Was it a spontaneous uprising or a carefully watched and manipulated event on a global chessboard? The truth is, we may never know, and maybe we don't have to, because some stories don't exist to be explained. They exist to be remembered. Tiananmen is not just a square. It's not just a protest. It's not just a page in Chinese history. It's a symbol etched into the soul of the 20th century. A place where hope collided with power, where voices rose and were swallowed by the weight of silence. And yet, the dream they carried still lingers. Thank you for walking with us through this story. If this video gave you something to think about, please consider sharing it. And if you have something to say, leave a comment. Because maybe, just maybe, truth begins where silence ends.